To us in Jesus' name, chapter 38, the last chapter. JoJo looked around. The only thing that could make this New Year's Eve party and ball any better would be if the East Coast family were also here. Several people had mentioned the absence of Gabe and Taylor. They did play the video of Taylor surprising Gabe up on the large monitor. Whoever was videoing had gotten a close-up on Gabe's sad face when the song Perfect had begun playing. The way he blew out of breath and his eyes closed and his head leaned back against that column in defeat, it had almost been comical if JoJo didn't understand exactly how he felt. Gabe was pitiful for sure and was trying to tough it out, and JoJo smiled. Then Taylor showed up, and it was a beautiful moment. Those two were a bright light, and when they weren't around, they were sorely missed. Right now, though, the place was packed with amazing family and friends. The Keith family was here, David and Carol, celebrating the changes in their family and in their own marriage since the Kinos had come into their lives. Their sons, Philip and Kyle, were having a blast, dancing with Brooke and Zoe, and being included in the group of older young people whom they admired, including young Eric and JoJo and Logan. They were also getting to know 15-year-old Carson Clark, who was Reverend Clark's great-grandson. The Davis family was here. Jeff and Mickey were taking some time for themselves, while baby Scarlett was up in the suite on the second floor of the hotel, along with babies Elijah Wallace, Jay Deal, and Chris Coley. Their babysitters were none other than Jordan's mom, Jewel Brooks, and Alex's mom, Ivana Morgan. Both women were very happy to use their evening to take care of sweet babies. Also in the suite were two highly paid agents protecting them all. The mothers of the babies arrived to nurse their little one whenever needed. Not only were Jeff and Mickey Davis having a wonderful time, but their boys, Daniel and Jeremy, ages 12 and 11, were having a grand time too. In 10 days, those boys would be ages 13 and 12, and were thinking of themselves as very grown up. Jeremy invited Josie Brooks to dance several times. Josie would be 11 in February. He also invited Sydney to dance, who was Reverend Clark's great-granddaughter, who was 11. Daniel had actually invited a girl from school to the dance, and the boys were having a blast. And the five, the two boys, Daniel's date, and Josie and Sydney, pretty much all stayed together, dancing and talking and eating. Daniel's date was in quotes. The Davis boys' aunt, their mother's sister, Marissa Coley, and her husband, Chris, were truly enjoying themselves and the company. They'd been given a huge surprise, a gift really, when they'd looked up to see Hart Akins, Chris Coley's best friend, come into the ballroom. The senior agent in charge of Texas, he'd come a long way for the New Year's Eve event. Hart wasn't married, but he almost immediately had his eye on a few of the young ladies here at the dance, one being Charity Copeland, Desi's older sister, and another being Camille Hall, Reverend Clark's great-niece. Ronnie Clark and his newfound family were all here. Ronnie, his daughter Linda, her grandchildren, Carson age 15 and Sydney age 11, also present, Andrew Hall, Ronnie's nephew, and Andrew's wife, Nikki, and their children, Harrison, age 28, and his sister, Camille, age 24. Also present was Ronnie's other nephew, Jesse Barnes, his wife, Becky, and their son, Patrick, age 27. Since both Harrison and Patrick were pastors and discovered that Charity Copeland was studying ministry in college, the three of them spoke together for a very long time. The Lee families were also in attendance, Justin and his wife Lori, Jason and Angel, and of course Kimmy and Jensen Deal, who spent most of their time with Rissa and Chris, and Jeffy and Cam, and Hart. Others present tonight were the Garcias from the apartments next to the Hopewood Chapel, Leonard, his wife Paula, and their son Caleb. Caleb was having a blast with Amari Meeks and Jamie Brooks, mostly stuffing their bellies and running around being silly and even dancing every once in a while. Bristol was present along with her grandmother, Christina Palma, who was given a chair of honor near Ronnie. She and Ronnie's daughter, Linda, were having grand conversations. And Bristol had been asked out onto the dance floor by almost all of the guys, Logan, young Eric, Philip, and also Patrick Barnes, who seemed quite taken with the beautiful Filipino girl. There were also a few others of the elderly patrons of the Hopewood Chapel present. Also in attendance at this assembly of fine people were the three, quote, daycare workers, unquote, Luciana, Lonnie, and Camilla, who'd taken care of the Kino children before they'd been rescued. They were all there with their husbands and children. And some of the youngest children included the Kino/Adams group: Angelina, Noah, Nate, Abe, and Manny Kino, and Sophia and Kelson and Ledger, and their cousin Emily, all Adams, and Brittany Meeks, and Melody and Jordan, and Eric and Shelley, and Ricky and Bree, and Joey and Breeze, and Mark and Bella were all taking turns supervising that raucous bunch. They danced with them, they helped feed them, they made bathroom runs, and they played games with them. Another family in the crowd tonight was Julian Washington and his wife and child. Julian had fought Gabe in the very first mini-mart, and the family had grown quite fond of him. Someone else the family had grown quite fond of and who'd been an integral part of their lives since the first mini-mart was Isla August. She was here with her cameraman, who was now her boyfriend. Also in the crowd tonight were many of the agents who'd been involved with the family over the past year. Agent Brown and his wife, Agent Trout with a date, Agent Wyatt with a date, Agent Diaz with a date, and at least 10 others. That didn't include the agents that were on duty tonight, who'd also brought their wives or dates or families because they were working on a 2-hour shift only. Also present were Jordan's college roommates, Jackie and Colton, who both brought dates. Jackie had been ecstatic to have been included in the invitation to hobnob with the celebrities. At least that was how she saw it. It was an amazing event filled with love and honor and respect for each person present. Everyone, even those who usually stick together, made an effort to divide up and fellowship with everyone else, which helped those outside the family to feel welcome and appreciated. And JoJo danced with Raylyn most of the night. Currently, the music was a slow one, Take My Breath Away. And Raylyn was simply enjoying the sway of her date's hard body as they moved in tandem. Sighing, she looked up at his face, taking time to study him. He had big brown eyes that seemed so gentle and compassionate. But she'd watched him play football, and this guy could be fierce. His nose was straight, slightly turned up, which was extremely cute. His lips were full, and she realized usually slightly smiling. Her eyes moved to his hair, thick and brown and currently brushed back off his face, though that was not always the case. Looking closer, she could see a few scars just at the hairline, and she wondered if that happened while playing football or at a martial arts event. She lowered her eyes to his mouth again, thinking of the kisses that they'd shared. She realized he also had a tiny scar near his upper lip. And then she remembered seeing him with his shirt off at the clinic. There had been a giant scar on his chest, and she wondered what that was all about. Unconsciously, her hand moved over his chest in a gentle gesture. His arm tightened on her back, and she looked up at him. "What are you thinking about, Ray?" he asked softly. She giggled. "I'm sorry. I was thinking about you, wondering about you." "What about me?" She sighed. "Well, like, you're not some smooth, pretty boy who is untested." He raised his eyebrows in surprise at the words. She smiled. I mean, you are pretty, in a very masculine way, but I was referring to the scars that you have on your face and on your chest." "Oh, pretty ugly, huh?" "Well, not to me. Well, maybe it's part of my heritage, but scars are kind of sexy." He laughed. "No, I'm serious. In my culture, scars are evidence of being tested and therefore of being a man. Are you self-conscious about them?" He thought for a minute and shrugged. "Well, the ones on my chest are pretty noticeable, and I admit sometimes make me feel self-conscious. For most girls, they kind of gross them out." "Well, not me. Do you mind if I ask about the scar on your chest?" He shook his head. "Well, it's not a pretty story." "Tell me," she encouraged. He swayed to the music and ran his hand over her back, being very careful to lift his arm correctly. "Well, I was 16, and my Aunt Jeffy had just won a Nobel Prize in medicine, and someone tried to kill her, and someone tried to kidnap her. 2 different groups." "Wow." "Yeah, and they wanted her to stop because she declared that there was a line to curing every disease, and Big Pharma wasn't going to allow that. So they demanded she stop her research, but she wasn't going to let them deter her, and so they went after her family, and they took Logan and I by gunpoint. We'd gone to a football meeting at school, and they took us to some abandoned building. They were going to cut up Logan, which absolutely terrified me. Why Logan? He chuckled. I asked the exact same question. The answer was he was the youngest, and it always hurt worse to have the youngest kid messed up. So I let them know that Logan wasn't even a Kino or an Adams. He wasn't even related to Jeffy. And then I tried to challenge them. I tried to get them to focus on me, and, well, I succeeded. He sighed. They still hurt him. They broke his arm. But they beat me almost to death, and they took a knife and they cut me open. A big X on my chest. I remember after the initial pain that there was so much blood. I didn't realize a body can hold that much blood and then lose that much blood and still be alive. Again, Raylin ran her hand over his chest. He placed his hand over hers. It's okay. I'm okay. I just hope it doesn't gross you out. Well, not at all. Like I said, maybe it's my heritage, but scars are a sign of manhood, a sign of overcoming, a sign of toughness. It's a rite of passage. He swallowed hard and nodded. Well, thank you for that, Ray. You are truly unique. Most girls think it's ugly and are really put off when they see me without a shirt. She sighed. Well, I saw the scar, but not at first. The first thing I noticed were all the muscles. The pecs, the abs, but I eventually saw the scars. They aren't revolting to me. I'm sorry, JoJo, nowadays. There seems to be a lot of shallow females. I may not be perfect, but I'm not shallow. There's nothing about you that is ugly, JoJo. Not one thing. To me, you're the most remarkable guy I've ever known, and the most beautiful. He snorted at that, and the music stopped, and they came to a halt on the dance floor, and he cupped her face in his left hand. Ray, you are the most incredible girl I've ever known, he mumbled as he lowered his head and kissed her. He raised his head and looked into her eyes and turned his head and kissed her again from a different angle. Pressing on her back, he pulled her even closer against him. They both drew in a sharp breath as they felt an arm around both of their shoulders, and young Eric leaned close. Get a room, preacher. JoJo chuckled. I was thinking the same thing, and I appreciate the reminder. Hey, what are brothers for? Young Eric smiled at Raylin. Hello, beautiful. My brother is a very lucky guy. JoJo nodded. Go away, Eric. Yes, sir. Sir, yes, sir. JoJo escorted Ray off the floor. They went to sit at a table off to one side. So, what's the reminder? She asked. Huh? You told Eric, thanks for the reminder. Is it that there are rooms right here in this very building? He shook his head. No. He called me by my nickname first to remind me that I have values and commandments that I want to keep. She smiled. I think that's awesome. You two are very close, aren't you? Yes, we're only a few months apart in age. I took his spot. Took his spot? JoJo nodded. You see, everyone thought young Eric was going to be the first grandchild born, but my father had a little indiscretion, and he and my mother had a one-night stand on his 18th birthday. She was staying at the Kinos. They'd taken her off the streets. There's a lot more to it, but to keep it short, she went to his room and he took her up on her offer. He would learn later that she was dying of a brain tumor, and she simply wanted to know love, to be close to someone intimately before she died. She went away, back to her home, a few weeks later. He never saw her again after that. He didn't know she was pregnant. Meanwhile, Uncle Ricky and Aunt Bree got married and got pregnant with Eric, so they were like 4 months along when Beth's mom showed up at my grandparents' house with me. Ray frowned. Wait, who's Beth? He smiled. Elizabeth Carter, my mother. She passed away shortly after I was born. She'd made her mother, my maternal grandmother, swear to give me to the Kinos to raise. Oh, wow. Well, how sad for Beth's mom. He nodded. For her mom and dad, Joseph and Sandra Carter. I was named after her father, my Grandpa Joe. Anyway, it's so cool that you see immediately how hard that would have been for them. He smiled. So anyway, the day I arrived there, my father was leaving for college. I mean, that very day. It wasn't that he didn't want me. He wanted me. He wanted his son, but he didn't know what to do. He was a kid himself. He had a football scholarship, so Grandma and Granddad kind of took over. First, they said that they would take me and take care of me for my dad while he goes to school and makes something of himself. And then they told Grandma Sandy that they would only do that and honor Beth's wishes if the Carters would promise to be in my life. Oh, I'm so glad they said that, Ray said. Yeah, my grandparents are very insightful. But the Carters were not well off, so my grandparents fixed them up, paid for all travels, paid off all medical bills, paid off the mortgage on their home, and got them better cars. They even ended up paying for college for Beth's siblings and then helping with things when they got married. After all, they were my aunts and uncles. Family, the Kinos take care of. After all, they were my aunts and uncles. Family. The Kinos take care of family. JoJo, that is a beautiful thing. He nodded. They're the best. They also flew Grandma Sandy and Grandpa Joe out to most of my games, high school and college, whenever they wanted to come. But yeah. Anyway, so my dad and I were very close. He says we kind of grew up together, and young Eric and I are like brothers, truly. Logan didn't come into our lives until we were almost 12. Both Eric and I loved him like a brother before we knew he would legally become my brother. But that's another whole very long story. But I'll tell you this, Logan too is scarred. And his scars came earlier in his life than mine did, and his scars stay with him more because they're more emotional than physical. Ray nodded. Oh, there's so much to ask, so much to learn about you and your family. JoJo smiled and nodded. Yes. It will take a long time for you to know it all, and for some reason, I want you to know it all. She sighed. How many girls have you said that to? He shook his head and smiled. No one else, Ray. No one but you. That's the truth. I don't lie. Then why me? I'm not sure. There's a pull. There's something about you. It's like a knowing that, well, that you're one of us. Her eyes opened wide. He shrugged and sighed. Sorry, I may have said too much. She shook her head. No, you didn't. I love that you think of me that way because, JoJo, I think you are special. So special. I have to pinch myself to realize that you are in my life in any capacity, even if you did simply rescue my sister from certain death and then asked me out. He frowned. There's nothing simple about it, and I didn't just happen to rescue Cali. She was put in my path, and that means that you were put in my path. You, Ray. You are special, and I didn't just happen to ask you out because, like, hey, why not? You have a light, Ray. Your name even says it, Ray, a ray of light. And I'm attracted to that light like a moth to flame. I want to... Well, why did you stop? Because I was about to say something really cheesy and really forward. She nodded. Well, say it. If there's anything you need to know about me, it's that I believe in communication. You can say what you want, what you feel, and I won't be offended or get all crazy. I'm pretty calm. He smiled and nodded. Yeah, I thought that about you when you didn't even hit Mrs. Kofer back, because I would have taken her out. I mean, if I was a girl. She giggled. I was in too much shock. I couldn't believe she hit me. I guess my reaction time needs some work. JoJo chuckled. Oh, we can work on that. Okay, let's work on it, but tell me what you were about to say. Oh, yeah, he smiled. I think I'm stalling. I think so, too, he sighed. Well, I was saying that I'm attracted to your light. I was going to say that I want to bask in that light. I want to know everything about that light. And I want that light to be only my light. Only for me. Exclusively for me. I don't want your light shining on anyone else. Not anyone? Well, not any available guys. She nodded. I see. He frowned. I'm sorry. I know that's too forward of me. This is really only our second date. Well, it may only be our second date, but a lot more has happened. You saved my sister. You came to the hospital. You put us in touch with Miss Angel. You helped us move. You took me to help feed the homeless. You invited me to church. You preached at church. We've exchanged Christmas gifts. You totally went all out to help save my job. And here we are. You want us to be exclusive. And really, JoJo, how could I say no to something that I want very much? How could I not be exclusive? I mean, you are the first person that I truly want to give the time of day to. Really? Are you saying that you haven't had any boyfriends? She shook her head. Oh, there might have been a few guys I thought were cute, but the moment they laid eyes on my sister, that was over. You, Raylyn, are the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. She gave a soft laugh. I'm not kidding. I mean, Cali, she is very pretty too. Of course she is. She looks a lot like you. But to me, there is no comparison. You take my breath away. Really. When that song was playing a little bit ago, that's what I was thinking. But like I said, I've known a lot of beautiful girls, but you, Raylyn, you top them all. And that's just the beginning because of what a deep person you are. Like you said yourself, you're not shallow. Ray, I want to see where this goes. She nodded. Me too. His heart sped up. Then that's it? That means we're exclusive? She nodded shyly, and he grinned. So, you are now my girlfriend, Raylyn Quinn? She nodded. And you are my boyfriend. She laughed. It almost sounds funny to say that. I've never been able to say that before. You've really never had a boyfriend? She shook her head. Not one boyfriend, not ever? She shook her head. Nope. Though really, even if someone had been interested in me, there's been no time. I concentrated on school, getting through it, getting out of it, and then I was totally focused on my job. I couldn't allow myself to be distracted. He smiled and held his hand out to her, and she took it. He squeezed her hand and didn't let go. They were distracted when Shelley Kino laughed, and they looked over to see her playing with her littlest children and several others. They were playing Duck, Duck, Goose, and she hit one on the head as she said goose and took off running and got back to the empty place and sat down. Ray looked her over. She wore a pretty white and black shimmery dress. It had a full skirt that came to just below her knees. Her feet were bare. Her hair was down and was longer than Ray had realized. When she'd run around the circle of kids, she'd flown. She was really fast. Ray nodded. Your family is indeed extraordinary. Your grandmother seems so young. Would it be rude for me to ask how old she is? JoJo shook his head. Not rude at all. I get asked that a lot for the same reason that you just stated. She seems so young. But Grandma is 65. 65? Wow, you're kidding. She works out almost every day. She follows Aunt Jeffy's protocols. We all do. It keeps her young and healthy. Ray nodded. Your Aunt Jeffy is her daughter, right? He nodded. Right. And if something was wrong with Grandma, Aunt Jeffy would know and would fix her right up. Ray nodded. That is so cool. She glanced over at Reverend Clark's table. I mean, JoJo. Look at the difference. Your grandmother is 65. Reverend Clark's daughter is 66. And she's all hunched over and looks like an old woman, all wrinkled, low energy. I'm not meaning to be mean, but there's such a marked difference, don't you think? JoJo nodded. A huge difference. Miss Linda has admittedly abused her body with drugs and alcohol when she was younger. I doubt she's ever exercised. You'd be surprised by the number of people who have never put forth any energy into making their bodies strong, training, pushing. For our family, it's a way of life. Ray nodded. I see that. But I have to say it's cool the way your family still keeps your priorities straight. He frowned. What do you mean? What does one have to do with the other? I mean, yes, you train your bodies daily and you try to eat right, but you're not all about that. I mean, there are a lot of people who do that, but that's their thing. That's what they're all about. That's all they talk about. They focus solely on that. They eat, drink, and sleep, exercise, or bodybuilding. But for you, it's like eating. Just something you do every day to stay alive. But you're all about so much more. About doing good, doing God's will, taking care of business, righting wrongs, helping others. And then like, oh yeah, but I do play football. Oh, and I do fight in the Kino Challenge, or I do all my own stunts when I make movies. JoJo nodded. Well, when your priorities are God first and foremost, everything else falls into the right place. And again, Ray, it's so cool that you see that. She smiled. I think I'm going to need to quote you on that. What? When your priorities are God first and foremost, everything else falls into the right place? I love that. He reached out reverently and took a lock of her straight black hair between his thumb and forefinger, and then ran his fingers down to the end, which was a considerable long way, and finally let go. Your hair is beautiful, Ray. Thanks, she said shyly. Tell me about your cultural beliefs about hair. Her eyes opened wide. Oh, well, I don't mean to pry or insult you, but don't the Indians have certain beliefs about hair being sacred? Well, yes, and I'm not insulted. It just surprised me. Many American Indians believe the hair is an extension of our spirit. Some also believe it holds our wisdom or knowledge. Traditionally, we let it grow long, but it's a personal choice thing. Like Cali, she's cut her hair short a few times. I think for her it was a show of rebellion. I've cut my hair and trimmed it for grooming purposes, like to keep it healthy and neat. It's already past my waist since the last time I trimmed it, and I don't want it to get any longer than that because it interferes with my work, or I sit on it. But yeah, in answer to your question, traditionally, we grow our hair. The males too a lot of times, but not as many now. He nodded. Well, my grandfather is native Hawaiian and has had long hair since he was a boy. Uncle Ricky also had long hair until he was in his 20s. The Hawaiians think along those same lines. I could add that they see hair as a spiritual connection to one's ancestors. All I can say right now is, Raylan, I think your hair is exquisite, and when I see your hair all down and flowing around you like tonight, it's it's an aphrodisiac. He grinned. I guess I shouldn't say that. She giggled. You can always be free to say what you want or what you feel. Smiling, Ray looked around and focused over on the corner of the room, close to where they were sitting. So, what's with all that? JoJo glanced at the corner. There was a large area in the corner divided off with chairs that were draped with black tablecloths. On the inside of that area appeared to be bedding. We pulled in soft mats, and those are sleeping bags and pillows all in rows. It's for the little ones. You see, they were told that they could stay up until midnight if they want, but everyone knows that they won't make it. So they each have a sleeping bag, and when they realize that they can't make it, they have a place to cuddle up and go to sleep. That way, my parents and my grandparents and my aunts and uncles can stay and see in the new year and not have to worry about the children. She smiled. You guys, you think of everything. New scene. Eric Kino watched as his wife played with their children and grandchildren and a few others. He couldn't keep from smiling. She was an amazing woman, an amazing wife, an amazing mother. His love, so full of life, a little mischievous, a little rebellious. With her, life was never dull. Not ever. From almost the moment he'd met her. Knowing her has been a huge blessing, and he will be eternally grateful for his sweet Shelley girl. Shelley glanced over to see her husband smiling at her and smiled in return and blew a kiss just before little Ledger smacked her hard on the top of the head and yelled, "Goose!" "Ow!" she complained dramatically and jumped to her feet. She chased Ledger around, but the 3-year-old made it back to his place in time. Shelley made a face as she started around the circle, tapping each child on their head. "You're a duck, and you're a duck, and I guess what? And guess what? You're all ducks. So there. You know why?" she asked, as she kept going around the circle, touching their heads. "I'll tell you why. Because none of you can catch me. Not one of you. Not you, not you, not you, not you," she said all the way around the circle. "So I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to say that all of you are gooses. I guess that means you are all geese. And when I count to 3, you all have to try to catch me, because I'm going to run all the way to that far wall over there and all the way back, and you won't be able to catch me. What do you think about that?" she said loudly. I bet we do catch you, Grandma, Sophia said, because she was the oldest that was playing. I bet you don't, Shelley continued. She ran around the circle again. Not you, not you, not you, not you, she said until she touched them all. The game had now gotten the attention of everyone in the vicinity who wasn't on the dance floor, and they all smiled, and they started placing bets, and a lot of them bet against Shelley, but not Eric. So, Shelley continued, when I count to 3, you try to catch me. You have to touch the wall before you can come back. Are you ready? Yes, yes, they all yelled. Okay then. 1, she waited a few beats. 2, she waited several more beats until she was closest to the far side of the circle. 3, she screamed and took off running. The 14 children screamed in delight, scrambled to their feet, and took off after her. She kept pace, not going too fast, but allowing them to stay within at least 5 feet of her. She glanced behind her and saw that Sophia and Brittany were catching up. Oh, shoot, she giggled and ran faster. Shelley touched the wall and headed back. The problem was, some of the children didn't seem to catch the part about having to touch the wall, and they cornered her as she came back toward them. So she ran in a circle around them, but her circling around allowed Sophia and Brittany and the others who'd obeyed the rules to catch up, and suddenly it was a free-for-all, and they grabbed her dress and her legs, and she tumbled down to roll on the floor, and they all jumped on top of her, and Ledger flew onto her abdomen, causing Shelley to grunt, and Joey stood up from where he sat. Ledger, boy, you know better than that. You only do that to guys, not girls. Ledger stood up and frowned. She's not a girl. She's my grandma. Oh, yeah? Shelley questioned as she sat up and grabbed Ledger. Grandmas are girls too, silly head. And now, because you jumped on me, I'm going to tickle you until you scream. He took off running to the far wall again, and Shelley was too tired to chase him down, and she let him go. She lay back, flat on her back. Okay, kiddos, you all win. You caught me. Who's going to help me up? I am, Eric said softly. She opened her eyes and peered up at her husband. Taking his offered hand, she allowed him to pull her to her feet, and she smiled at him. He smiled at her and gave her a quick kiss on the lips. You are adorable. You know that. Oh, yes, I know. I was just lying there thinking how adorable I must look, a grown woman, lying down on the floor in the middle of a ballroom. Grown woman? Where? He asked, looking all around. Very funny, Grandmaster Kino. She sighed. I was trying to wear them all out, and instead I wore myself out. He nodded. Joey, he called. Sir, Joey said immediately as he approached his mother and stepfather. Eric nodded at the children. Wear them out. Joey grinned. Will do. He looked around. Mark, Logan, young Eric, a little help, please. He didn't currently see JoJo. They all came, thinking there was a problem with Shelley. The goal is to wear them out. They all nodded with a smile and gathered all the children together. Shelley watched as 4 men and all the children huddled up, clapped, cheered, nodded in understanding, and took off. Shelley looked back at her husband. Dance with me, he said, unless you're too tired. She smiled. I'm never too tired to dance with you, but you might have to hold me up. He nodded. Challenge accepted. Pulling her close, they barely swayed to the soft music that was currently playing, which was, apropos, Etta James, At Last. Shelley lay her head against Eric's chest. This feels so good. He spun in a slow circle. Yes, it does. He looked over the crowd. You know, we created this. What? She muttered. He nodded around. All of this. Well, I mean, with God. We created it. She sighed. How could I have known over 30 years ago that a sexual assault, my marriage ending, and signing up for a cheap YMCA Taekwondo class would lead to all of this? He smiled. That really is the lesson, isn't it? We don't know God's whole plan. We just take a step in the direction we think he wants us to go, and then he reveals the next part of the plan. Just like when I was a kid, I didn't know how I was going to, quote, teach the world. Even more, what I was going to teach the world. I could have questioned God and asked him how teaching fighting skills to people is going to help the world. I didn't know or understand how, but God knew. He knew. He knew that sometimes we don't go at the enemy directly, and by that I mean we don't preach at them. Instead, we approach from a back door. We teach them something else and allow them to learn from our good example. But that example must be exemplary. When Ricky had his indiscretions, he knew and understood that he could have messed everything up. Instead, he publicly confessed and repented and has more than made up for it. In a way, it's even good that he showed that one can come back, no matter how bad it is. Jesus' grace is sufficient. Well, sometimes he really beats himself up over that, Shelley said. Oh, he's spoken to you about it? He asked, a little surprised. She shook her head. No, but Bree has. Eric nodded. Regrets, remorse, they're hard to live with. There are some things that we do that we can't take back. What's done is done. I, too, have many regrets, but we have to let those go. God forgives us. Jesus forgives us. If we continue to live in regret, the enemy gets into our heads. So we have to let go and move forward and strive to do better. No matter what we talk about, Eric, you always make the solution seem so simple. He smiled. Oh, it's not me that does that. It's God. Because the solution is simple. The gospel is simple. The rules God gives us are simple. And the answer is simple. Grace is simple. To me, there is a clearly visible line between the darkness and the light. So the choice is simple. And the closer we are to Jesus, the clearer that line becomes. Shelley sighed. And when we clearly see that line and choose the light, it brings nothing but pure joy. He nodded. It does indeed. That's what I felt ever since you came into my life, Eric. Pure joy. He sighed. Well, babe, there's been our share of really hard times. Even those times, Eric, brings me pure joy because the hard times makes all the other times seem even brighter. Like right now, as this crazy year comes to an end. Would I be this grateful and this happy if I hadn't had to consider living without you? Would I be this happy if I didn't know that there were 5 children of my own blood who were now free of their captors and living a beautiful life filled with love and joy? I can't imagine being without them, and really, I can't wait to meet the ones who didn't make it. He stopped and tilted her face up. We'll wait, he said pointedly. She laughed and nodded. He ran his hand over her face. We'll work hard until the very end, Shelley, being in service to our family, our friends and strangers, listening to God speak to us and obeying his promptings. It's a joyous game we play, isn't it? She sighed. It is. I love you, Eric Kino. Thank you, God, for sending him to me. Thank you, Father, for bringing Shelley Girl into my life. And thank you for this large and amazing family that you've blessed us with. Amen, Shelley whispered. The music came to an end at the same time, and Eric led Shelley off the floor. Can I get you something to drink? She nodded. That would be great. New scene. Over the next hour, one by one, the little ones started drifting off to sleep. Their parents would hold them a minute or two and then gently go lay them on their sleeping bag and tuck them in. Eric finally went back over and knelt down and prayed over the sleeping children. Many people got a photo of that because it was a beautiful thing to see. Philip and his brother Lyle, ages 16 and 14, and Carson, age 15, were grateful to be included in the older group of people. They sat around a table with Brooke and Zoe and Ryder and Cali and young Eric and Jordan and Melody and Logan and JoJo and Raylynn and Alec and Desi. Philip thought it was cool that the older guys didn't try to distance themselves from the younger people. Instead, they engaged them in conversation as if they, too, were important. Again, Philip was struck by how differently these people operated. It wasn't just an act. They truly did God's work, and to Philip, they were inspirational and motivational. They talked about the coming year. They talked about how Philip will be a senior and what position he played in football. They talked about Lyle will be a sophomore, and he might be the quarterback, and he wants to attend a QB camp in the spring. And JoJo surprised him by telling him that if his shoulder was doing well, he might spend a few weeks giving Lyle some personal coaching. And that made both Philip and Lyle very excited. 16-year-old Zoe and 15-year-old Brooke excused themselves and headed to the restroom. Are they okay? excused themselves and headed to the restroom. Are you okay? Zoe asked Brooke. She nodded. I think so. Just feeling a little queasy. You mean like you might throw up? Brooke nodded. Zoe shook her head. All this time, girl, you had me convinced that you had stomach issues. Why didn't you just tell me? Did you think I'd judge you or something? Brooke frowned. I don't know. I guess I was just trying to, ignore it. You mean like maybe if you don't think about it, it will just go away? Brooke sighed. Maybe. And then when Desi told us that we had to go to the doctor and make sure we're not sick or doing drugs, I thought about running away again. But then I thought, I can't hide this forever. And I've been feeling kind of scared, like, what am I going to do, you know? They went inside the large, luxurious restroom, and Zoe sighed. I really should have known, or guessed. I mean, you never had your period for the 2 months that I've known you. Brooke sniffed. Oh, I'm sorry, Brooke. I didn't mean to make you cry. Come on, cheer up. Remember, you said tonight you're going to have a good time. Brooke nodded. Her face was pale. Uh-oh. She turned and ran into a stall just as Jeffy Kino Wallace came into the restroom. Jeffy immediately heard the retching, and she glanced at Zoe. Hello, is Brooke sick? Zoe's eyes went big. You know Brooke? Jeffy smiled. My name is Jeffy. At least that's what everyone calls me. I'm a doctor, and I'm a Kino, and I don't know her personally, but I know about her and about you. I'm going to go check on her. She went back to the stall and knocked. Brooke, are you okay? Brooke sniffed as she flushed the toilet. Yes, I'm fine. Will you come out here and let me check on you? I'm a doctor. Brooke slowly opened the door and peeked out. You're a doctor? You look like a kid. Jeffy smiled. Thanks, but I'm 28. Oh, well, anyway, there's nothing you can do unless you do abortions. Jeffy closed her eyes briefly at the evil that smacked her in the face and immediately rebuked it in Jesus' name. No, I don't kill babies, Jeffy said softly, but I can still help you. Come sit out here for a minute. Brooke went out and sat down on a padded bench, and Zoe came to sit next to her. Jeffy knelt down in front of Brooke and took her hand. She sighed and nodded. It's not really morning sickness anymore. You've had such bad nutrition. Your body is trying to get stabilized now that you've had some good food. Let me help you a little bit. Just sit still a minute. Jeffy breathed deep and looked into Brooke's eyes. The emotional pain washed over Jeffy in waves, but she tried to not show it. She took it in and finally got to the nausea and breathed calmness and told Brooke's body to accept the nutrition. She calmed the hormones that were rushing through her system, took away the nausea, and silently prayed for a blessing of health and, more importantly, emotional healing and clarity of mind. She then spoke quietly, rebuking the darkness that was trying to take the girl over. In Jesus' name. Finally, she nodded and smiled at the young girl who had tears streaming down her face now. It's going to be okay, Brooke, Jeffy said. God's got you now. He's healing you. You are his. He's telling me right now that you are his daughter. She smiled. Is the nausea gone? Brooke's eyes blinked and opened wide. Oh, yes, it actually is. How did you do that? Jeffy smiled. God has given me a gift, and that's why I became a doctor. He allows me to heal. So you can just go around healing everyone? Jeffy shook her head. Only the ones that God asked me to heal, and only in the name of Jesus. I saw you and Zoe came in here, and I felt God urging me to come in here and check on you. I can help take away pain or unease. I can help diagnose a problem fairly quickly, which really helped me when I was setting up medical clinics in Africa. You went to Africa? Many times. The last time, though, it was special. There was this little girl, Sanyu, and her brother, Ballon. Sanyu had malaria and was very sick, and I was able to diagnose her quickly and get her fixed up. She sighed. She and her brother are coming to visit me sometime near the end of January. I'll introduce you. Brooke and Zoe nodded. They all turned when Jordan and Melody came into the restroom. Hey, Jordan said brightly. Oh, did we interrupt? Jeffy rose. No, I was just helping Brooke a little bit. Jordan nodded knowingly. Cool. She smiled at Brooke. Whatever was wrong, I bet you feel a lot better, as Dr. Kino works miracles. Did she cure you of something? Brooke asked. Jordan nodded. Yes. Several times now. She's the best. She's a famous doctor. Did you know that? Both younger girls shook their heads. She won a Nobel Prize. She's cured several diseases. She started the Heal the World Foundation when she was just a little kid. She's a genius. She even has her own line of medicines coming out that are very inexpensive and help heal the body and take away pain better than anything on the market. Wow, Zoe said. Jeffy smiled. Well, I'm going to get back out there and find my husband because he's looking for me. He's on the way over here right now. She smiled and took Brooke's hand. Let's meet again soon, and we'll talk about the baby and how I can help you. And make no mistake, Brooke, it is a baby, a complete whole person with her own DNA. And if anyone tries to tell you that it's not a baby, that's Satan talking. Don't listen to him. He wants to destroy you. I want to help you. Did you feel the light? Do you believe me? Brooke nodded. Jeffy leaned forward and kissed her forehead and headed out. They could hear her as she opened the door. Cam, I've been looking for you, he said. She smiled. I know. Sorry. Jordan Melody grinned. How did she know her husband was coming to find her? Zoe asked. Dr. Kino is psychic, Melody answered. She knows a whole lot about everyone. Brooke frowned. Well, she helped my nausea to go away, and after she took my hand, I feel so much calmer. Really, almost happy or something. It was weird. Jordan nodded. Yep, that's Dr. Kino, all right. I mean, Dr. Kino Wallace. Or actually, Aunt Jeffy. Since I'm marrying her nephew, I'm supposed to start calling her Aunt Jeffy. Melody smiled at that. The way things were going between her and Logan, she was pretty sure that eventually she, too, would be able to call Dr. Kino Wallace Aunt Jeffy. New scene. A little before 11 p.m., a revved-up, modernized version of the song The Final Countdown came to an end. It had been fast-paced and fun, and almost everyone had been on their feet, dancing, some a little crazier than others, and the DJ spoke. Well, that was fun. So, everyone, find a seat and relax for a few minutes. Grab a drink or something to eat if you want, because we have a treat for you. So, let me invite Grandmaster Kino up here to tell you what's about to happen. Everyone applauded as Eric stepped up onto the small stage and the DJ handed him a microphone. Hello, everyone. I sure hope you're all having a good time. I know I am. How blessed are we to be able to come here and enjoy each other's company to bring in the new year. He waited while everyone applauded and cheered. Well, now, we do have a nice surprise. Ricky and Bree have worked very hard over this past week, and along with some of their friends who just happen to be in post-production film editing, they have put together a little short film of all of you. This is our past year cut down to a 30-minute segment. There are lots of pics and video. By request, not everyone's birthdays are mentioned. We can make this video available to any of you who would like to have a copy, and there actually is a longer version for those who want more detail. I was told that it may or may not be in chronological order because sometimes the subject matter takes precedence over the timeline. Without further ado, this is a snapshot of our year. Eric stepped back down and took a seat at the table next to his wife. Several other people grabbed drinks or desserts and headed back to their seats, while others merely turned their chairs around. The two giant monitors in the large ballroom came to life, and the first thing everyone saw was last year's New Year's Day celebration, just after midnight. Right here at the Golden Hotel Ballroom. As music played, several pictures of last year's party flashed across the screen. One stood out, of young Eric, sneaking an alcoholic beverage, which made everyone laugh. Jordan looked up at him in surprise, and he smiled and shrugged. I told you I was a handful. It moved to January birthdays, and the music switched to happy birthday as pics of the Davis boys and Matthew Stewart's and Heather Tanner's celebrations appeared. February began with a giant heart and then showed a pic of Jeffy and Cam kissing, celebrating Valentine's Day, and then switched to a pic of his hand on her swollen, pregnant belly. That got a laugh. And then there were a few pics of young Eric arriving at the studio for the first shooting day of his first movie. Another February birthday montage went by, including Kimmy Lee Deal, Gracie Nash, Charlie and Erilyn Stewart, Josie Brooks, Keegan Tanner, and Jody and Jake Apple, and Kaylee Quinn. The film stayed with the birthday music and came as it hit March, and pics from Jeffy's and Lyle Keith's birthdays. It changed to a video montage of Ricky choreographing young Eric in a few fight scenes and the final results, and everyone applauded that. April 1st began with a short video of Gabe teaching Taylor how to shoot to the music Bang Bang My Baby Shot Me Down. Everyone chuckled. That morphed into pics of Jake's homecoming, then Gabe winning a little class tournament at Kino Martial Arts, then video of Gabe and Julian Washington fighting at the first ever Kino Mini Mart. Julian had been a worthy opponent. Several people leaned over and rubbed Julian's head affectionately, and he smiled and nodded. The music stopped, and next was heard the video of Isla's interview with Gabe, calling him the ultimate male. That got a laugh. The music and the mood switched to Andra Day's Rise Up, came on as pics of their beloved Lena Bug's bruised and beaten face appeared on screen. Several more of Jake holding her or brushing a tear away, or of Lena brushing down a horse, of her and Jake riding together, of her whistling at one of Gabe's baseball games, of Jake arriving at a game on his bike and Lena jumping into his arms, of Jake's picnic proposal, and finally of the wedding, which happened in June. The movie then went back in time to April. It began with April birthdays: Melody Keith, Jamie Brooks, Lizzie Tanner, Nolan Sawyer. After that, there was a pic of Robert Adams showing his birth and death dates and a few pics from the funeral. Then, as the music Glory Days by Bruce Springsteen played, they showed video of Gabe playing baseball, his hits, his steals, getting hit by pitches, and all the pickoff attempts. Then it switched to actual footage of TV reports of the missing 17-year-old Gabe Tanner, who'd been abducted from the roadside. It switched to Eye of the Tiger as it showed some video and pics of the time Gabe was held hostage, of his now famous prayer, of this fight to get away, and then of Gabe on a gurney being loaded into an ambulance. Gabe in the hospital, all beaten up and bruised, and finally switched to the song Center Field, known as Put Me in Coach, showing Gabe back out on the baseball field, first on crutches and finally actually playing again. And the film went back to May. May was a difficult one. It began happy enough, different versions of the different families singing happy birthday, while they showed pics of people with May birthdays with the dates: Ricky Kino, Sophia Adams, Lyle Keith, Lisa Stewart. The music changed to A Million Little Miracles by Elevation Worship, as it showed 5 more happy birthdays that hadn't been able to witness: Emmanuel, May 2nd, Noah, May 7th, Angelina, May 10th, Abraham, May 11th, and Nathaniel, May 27th. The music changed to Tears in Heaven by Eric Clapton, and it went to pics from the memorial and showed the birth and death dates of each of the 5 murdered children. And what took everyone's breath away was it showed stills of each child taken from birth videos that were uncovered during the investigation. And after that were the pics of the 10 murdered women and their birth and death dates, which sadly all came one day after the birth of the child that they'd carried. Shelley broke down crying, and Eric had to put his arm around her and comfort her. Fortunately, the mood changed again when it showed Gabe's promposal, and then actual footage of Gabe and Taylor at the prom. Then there were pics of Gabe's graduation and the parking lot fight that happened after the graduation, and then an even better fight, video of the giant Nerf gun battle at the graduation party. May ended with another hard thing and another fun thing. They looked up at the big screen to see police photos of the aftermath of Taylor's attempted kidnapping from the beach, and Gabe's throat having been slit, and Keegan having to shoot a man right there in front of the family. That was the hard thing. The good thing was the very next day. The entire family played a pickup game of football on the beach. It was like therapy for the family and was much needed. The video of the game offered a lot of laughter as the family watched their own antics on the beach. June began again with birthdays: Eric and Gabe's joint birthday party at the inn, and then pics of JoJo celebrating his 21st birthday with just his father. Then it switched to more fun pics of Jake's and Lena's wedding. That morphed into lots of pics of all the good food, and Maddie dancing with Jake and Gabe at the wedding, or Maddie being hugged and kissed on the cheek, or Maddie laughing and talking to many different people. And then June ended with a giant portrait of Maddie, Madeline Lewis, with her birth and death dates, and then it showed a picture of her very old wedding portrait with her husband. Maddie was 87 when she passed on June 18th. July began again with July birthdays: Brittany on the 16th, Logan on the 17th, Jordan on the 18th, Jewel on the 19th, Brody also on the 19th, Peyton on the 20th, and finally Carson Clark on the 29th. And after that, there was some hilarious footage of different July 4th antics. There was a little footage of the 3-gun quick shot contest at the Eagle Eye Gun Club and the Gabe Tanner Martial Arts Tournament. Both events had been held to raise money for the Murphy family, though that was not made known in the video. August began with only one birthday, Amari Meeks, on the 7th. And next were some beach parties and kids' first day back to school photos, but then it got serious. There was video of the Ameritech breakfast and then the meeting that had begun at the Kino's house. There were pics of their first meeting with Luciana, who'd been so brave to come and tell the Kinos about their children, and then it switched to a TV breaking news bulletin that Gabe Tanner had been shot while trying to rescue Taylor Kino from another kidnapping attempt. And then a second breaking news story, Grandmaster Kino had been shot. It goes on to tell the bizarre story of stolen eggs and sperm and the creation of 4 children. The little movie went on to try to convey what the families of the Kinos and Tanners went through from that point forward. First, Gabe was going to be okay, and there was hope for Grandmaster Kino. Then Grandmaster Kino was brain dead, and Gabe was also dying. There were photos from the waiting room as the families grieved and tried to hold it together and accept God's will. Holding each other, crying together. There were photos of an unrecognizable Eric Kino and photos of Gabe unresponsive as he lay in a coma. A picture of Lizzie gazing out a hospital window with her husband's hand on her shoulder. A picture of Taylor curled up in a ball in a chair next to Gabe's bed. There were photos from Shelley's first meeting with her children. There was video of a few conversations. One of the older grandchildren speaking softly about being strong to honor their grandfather and their brother Gabe. And another when Jeffy came into the waiting room after the surgery and was barely able to hold it together. She spoke of her father's dismal prognosis. There were pics and video of Jake and Lena and Gabe's sisters arriving and crying and praying over their brother. There was video of prayer circles and Zoom meetings. There was video of Ricky reading Eric's letter to the family. There was video of the family accepting defeat and getting ready to turn off Eric's life support and Gabe miraculously interrupting the procedure. Ricky and Bree and their editor friends did a wonderful job of doing justice to the pain and fear and acceptance of God's will that went on during that time span. And finally, there's video of Eric waking and everyone coming in to see him and speak to him. The word September flashed across the screen, and then there was birthday music as it showed the August birthdays that were finally celebrated that first Saturday in September. First, Joey, whose birthday had been on August 22nd, who'd made it clear that he didn't want his birthday celebrated. And finally, Bree's on August 27th, and Taylor's on the 30th, and the movie showed their big birthday bash, a day that would show a new love beginning and make Gabe even more popular than he already was. Live video of the show that Logan, young Eric, JoJo, and Gabe put on for the ladies was shown, and the dancing and the eating and the new children and a new young lady attending the party, Jordan Brooks. Young Eric smiled and reached over and took Jordan's hand. "A fateful day," he whispered. September on the video surprisingly didn't contain any birthdays except one, Hannah Brown, on the 18th. Most didn't even know who she was, but a few did and would eventually fill in everyone else. September contained snippets of many talks and testimonies that Gabe and the Kino family were asked to share at different churches because of their big spiritual experience of being dead and talking to Jesus. September also had lots of footage of Taylor's only experience of playing a sport at high school. Everyone was duly impressed by her quickness and the power of her serve and applauded her. The September part of the video was smack full of life, volleyball games, young Eric training for the Kino Challenge, the announcements of the genders of the 7 of the 8 babies that would be joining the family, the viral pics of Taylor being kissed by the Brookside High QB, Jake has a big send-off as he leaves for deployment. Ricky and young Eric speak to UCLA softball team, and the following week the team comes to watch young Eric train. A news headline that was said there was a 5th Kino child, pics of the 4 hugging their newfound brother. Young Eric takes Jordan out, and Jordan gets drugged, and Eric gets arrested. They had video of his arrest, of his fight in jail, his beaten face, and Jordan's statement to the press, which everyone chuckled over. "He wouldn't have to drug me to get me to go to his bed. I'd go willingly and often." The September video ended with Gabe's, Taylor's, Brody's, and Logan's acts of charity in Nashville, and then finally their performance, and the audience watching this night applauded as they were reminded through snippets of the amazing performances given that night. October began with birthdays that included Sidney Clark on the 11th, Mark Adams on the 29th, and his mother, Shelley Kino, on the 27th. There was a video of Shelley's party, and then the movie concentrates mostly on volleyball and hard sparring days for Eric and Gabe as they continued to train. And then it showed live breaking news. Eric Kino, III, was abducted from a gas station as he was giving food to the homeless. There are pics of the family as they wait for news and pics of Jordan as she prays for his return and of her sleeping in his closet. And then the headlines again. Young girl's abduction from schoolyard is related to the kidnapping of Eric Kino. And finally another headline. Found and alive. Eric Kino rescues his girlfriend's little sister. They watched pics and video of Eric and Josie's ordeal. The next thing in the video was Alec and Desi when they first came to stay with the Kinos, including amazing before and after pics. October ended with two things, one horrible, one good. The horrible one was pics and headlines of Jordan being attacked and her strong fight that aided in the capture of a serial rapist at UCLA. And the good one was the fall/Halloween event taking place at the Gabe Tanner Community Center in Pine Forest. November was a month filled with life-changing events. It began the very next morning after the Fall Festival at the GTCC. The people at the New Year's Eve party looked up to see pics of a wrecked ambulance and emergency vehicles everywhere, and the news report of how a woman's teen son crawled into a wrecked emergency vehicle to deliver his own baby brother and sister. Next was shown pics and video of another birth, when Elijah Cameron Kino Wallace was born at a restaurant shortly after the Kino Challenge, and after that there were pics of Lizzie Tanner being placed in an ambulance with little Isaiah and Gentian on her chest. There were quite a number of other November birthdays in the family. The birthday montage included Jonathan Jones Stewart and Lachlan Bright Stewart, born November 1st, Elijah on the 9th, Jeff Davis on the 9th, Hart Akins on the 12th, Milena Apple on the 22nd, Ledger Adams on the 23rd, Scarlett Davis on the 24th, Christian Coley on the 25th, Isaiah and Gentian Tanner on the 25th, and finally Jason Jensen Deal on the 26th. And once the November birthday montage finished, they watched a news story about a stalker ex-boyfriend who fought with and injured and tried to kill his ex-girlfriend's brothers. "That's you," Brooke whispered to Philip. He smiled and nodded, and Lyle too, but I ended up with a brain injury. Next, through pictures and music and live video, they were reminded of 4 giant events. Gabe winning the second ever Kino Mini Mart, young Eric III winning his first Kino Challenge, the beautiful wedding of Alec and Destiny Morgan, which included video of the Johnny B. Good number, and finally the giant feeding of the 5,000. They also were shown video and pics of all the attacks that took place to keep the big Thanksgiving event from happening. From Rose being stabbed, young Eric and Jordan being attacked behind the inn, a gunman trying to shoot Gabe at breakfast, to the all-out attack in front of the GTCC where Gabe fell from the ladder and was shot at point-blank range. Then pics and video showed just some of the amazing things that took place. Miracle healings, celeb singers, amazing choirs, delicious food, and of course the great water case competition. Before the movie headed to December, it went all the way back to New Year's Day of the past year into the Trojans winning the Rose Bowl. The next several minutes was all JoJo, his amazing showing at New Year's Day game, and then the montage of his entire season, showing highlights and final scores of every game. The crowd cheered for JoJo, seeing how good he was and knowing that it was all over for him was bittersweet. Still, they celebrated his wins with him and moaned over the 2 losses with him as they watched the montage. Raylan looked up at her guy. Her guy, she reminded herself, at least for now. Slipping her hand into his, she squeezed it. He looked down at her and smiled, made an oh well, shrugging kind of gesture. She wanted to hug him and to hold him and to comfort him and to kiss him. Her heart swelled toward this fine son of God. He also didn't seem real. She remembered seeing him at the last game, being put on a gurney and placed in an ambulance. The camera zoomed in on his face. He wiped his face with a towel. Just for a moment, he appeared to be crying, and then he smiled and raised his thumb in the air. Everyone laughed now as they watched the final hit over and over and over, because Ricky thought it would be good to get it all out of their system. And JoJo shook his head and laughed. Ricky went to him and put his arms around him and hugged him hard, then mussed his hair before he went back to his seat. Everyone applauded JoJo again, and some stood and whistled. The movie switched to December birthdays. It included Raylene Quinn on the 1st, Iris Tanner on the 10th, Emily Adams on the 11th, young Eric on the 14th, Kelson Adams on the 16th, Daisy and Lily Tanner on the 19th, and finally Rose and Violet Tanner on the 25th. The movie then briefly covered the finding and rescue of a sweet little 13-year-old girl named Hannah Brown. There were pics of Taylor and Hannah and Gabe, and pics of her currently with the Apples. It showed her holding puppies with Charlie and Matt Stewart. The healing taking place was beautiful. Rather than the movie showing photos or videos of all the family Christmas celebrations, it went to the first time Logan saw the Hopewood Chapel Church of Christ. There was a montage of all their work and amazing before and afters. They showed the martial arts demo they gave for the people in the apartments. They showed the Garcias and Caleb always around, helping wherever they could. They showed Amari and Brittany coming to live with the Kinos. Jamie Brooks had enjoyed seeing his own face up there several times, so he reached over and nudged Amari whenever his face was up there on the screen. Amari grinned. Brittany was asleep, but the little ones would see the video tomorrow. The movie showed clips of the tree decorating pizza party outside of Hopewood Chapel and the whole crowd singing and playing drums to praise by elevation worship. It showed the new stained glass window. It showed the newly formed Hopewood Chapel choir singing and Logan singing "Oh, Holy Night," which made everyone still with the shock of just how beautiful his voice sounded. That beautiful moment shifted to young Eric and Jordan and the rest of the family walking the red carpet at Eric's movie premiere with music from the soundtrack of the movie. There was instant applause. It then shifted to Taylor being lifted in the air by Lance White at the high school Christmas dance. It followed the rest of the dance. Next on the big screen was a news story of how a gang was robbing a church and the elderly members and how that gang attempted murder of a grandmother, her daughter, and her daughter's friend. Logan looked over at Melody and took her hand, and she smiled up at him. Right after the news story was another one about the ESC quarterback rescued a girl from being beaten in her car on campus. It showed pics of Cali shortly after the attack. Several people reached over and patted her head or her back. Patted her head or her back. Hold on. "So glad you're okay now," Ryder said softly. She smiled. The next treat was showing Reverend Clark being surprised by presenting his family to him, and that brought tears to people's eyes. Then it showed the most recent church service, Patrick and Harrison preaching, and then Reverend Clark telling his story. They listened as the movie showed the part where Ronnie broke down. "My father turned his back on me. My brother hated me. My mother was ashamed of me. No one believed me. My baby sisters were just babies. I learned last Sunday that those sisters had been told the story, and they believed me. They believed me. They'd been filled with the Holy Spirit, and my sisters passed away many years ago, but I just found out that they taught their families that God is real and that He hears us and He answers our prayers, and I learned that they did this because they believed me. I didn't know I had a family. I thought I was all alone, but I have a beautiful, wonderful family." There were some sniffles as they neared the end of the short movie. It showed the day Ryder, Zoe, and Brooke got off the streets, eating dinner with JoJo. Then there was a picture of them all dressed, sharing Christmas. Ryder with the Adams Kinos, and Zoe and Brooke with the Morgans and Copelands. They also had pictures of a Christmas party held in Quapaw, Oklahoma, showing Ray, Kay, Danny, and Alo, and many others in the small town. Then there was a long montage of pics of Ameritech agents, one after the other, who had worked with the families on each coast to serve and protect. And then there was a section of several agents who'd been wounded in the line of duty this year, including Jeff Davis and Cam Wallace, and Agent Key, and 2 who had died. They all had a standing ovation. The memoriam portion continued with again showing the 5 murdered children, the 10 murdered women, Miss Maddie Lewis and Robert Adams, and finally beautiful Bree and Ricky appeared on screen. "Hey everyone," Bree began, "I have to tell you that I cried many times as Ricky and I worked to find the videos and pics of everything that happened this year. And really, we didn't include many things because we'd be sitting here for hours." Ricky nodded. "Putting this together has definitely been cathartic for us. I guess we hope it has the same effect on you, a cleansing of sorts, because it has been one heck of a year." Bree smiled. "It has, and I'm so grateful to be able to see all of you here tonight. I'm grateful that my daughter and Gabe are both alive and well, even though they aren't here right now." Ricky smiled. "And I'm grateful that others came through and are still with us. Bristol and Christina, Melody, Jordan, young Eric, Josie, Philip Lyle, and my father," he said as his emotions welled up. Bree nodded. "And our 5 beautiful new siblings, and thanks to Luciana, Camila, and Lonnie for taking care of them, and especially Luciana, who bravely risked her life to save the children." They raised champagne glasses filled with water with a slice of lemon. "Here's to you, our amazing family. That includes all of you. We love you and wish you a very happy new year." They clinked glasses and drank, and the movie ended. Everyone stood and applauded. The DJ put on Johnny Be Good as a tribute to the film, and everyone jumped up to dance, and in 30 minutes, the new year would be here. During the last 30 minutes of the year, couples danced, people hugged and loved on each other. Ricky and Bree were congratulated 100 times for the work put into the film and how it was poignant and wonderful. The young couples paired off, young Eric and Jordan, Logan and Melody, JoJo and Raylynn, Ryder and Cali. Patrick Barnes decided to get a last dance in with Bristol. Harrison Hall got a last dance with Charity Copeland, and Hart Akins got a last dance with Camille Hall. Daniel and Jeremy Davis stood in a circle with Josie Brooks and Sidney Clark. Philip and Lyle Keith and Carson Clark chatted with a group that included Zoe and Brooke and a few other young teens who were children of Ameritech agents that were in attendance. Young Jamie Brooks, Amari Meeks, and Caleb Garcia were obviously getting tired because they sat down at a table and simply watched everyone else. Ricky and Bree, Eric and Shelley, Jason and Angel, Mark and Bella, Joey and Breeze, Jeff and Mickey, Justin and Lori, Alec and Desi, Andrew and Nikki, Jesse and Becky, Chris and Marissa, Jeffy and Cam, and many other couples simply swayed softly to the slow, romantic music playing. And Jordan looked around and smiled. Isn't it nice to see all these men being so sweet and loving with their wives? Young Eric nodded and pulled Jordan up against him. Yes, it is. Is this how we're going to be when we've been married 30 years? He smiled. Yes, ma'am. I will love you and cherish you forever. She sighed. But what if I disappoint you somehow? That's impossible. It's not impossible. Okay, I'll play the game. Name something you think you might do to disappoint me. What if I have a horrible softball season? He laughed. Well, we can't have that, so I guess you'd better train extra hard. She giggled. Oh, 3. I never thought in a million years that I could feel this happy. He hugged her tight. I'm glad you're happy, babe, because you make me happy. The song ended and the DJ spoke. Okay, everyone, let's get ready to count this thing down. Wave at the cameras. The large monitor sprang to life again, showing live video of their own party and everyone waving to the cameras. They all started counting down from 10. Then it hit 1. People yelled and cheered, Happy New Year. Then almost all at once, the couples came together in deep, heartfelt, and some very passionate kisses. And Philip smiled at Zoe. Well, I want us to have a good luck this year, too, so he bent down and kissed her cheek. Zoe smiled at him. Thanks. We need some good luck. Well, you don't even know how lucky you have it being found by the Adams/Kino families. They will make sure your life from now on is blessed. Lyle had the same type of interaction with Brooke, only he simply raised her hand and kissed it. Hey, I know we don't know each other very well, and I'm younger than you, but it's tradition, and I want us to have a blessed year. Brooke smiled. Thanks, me too. Cam pulled away from kissing his wife and looked into her worried eyes. What is it, baby? Or should I ask, who is it? She sighed. It's Brooke. I'm so upset by what I saw. I don't think I'm going to be able to rest tonight at all. I need to go talk to Daddy and Mark. Now? She nodded. I am sorry. I feel her trauma so much it's making me sick. When you went to the restroom to help her, did you take her pain into yourself? She sighed. I guess I did. You're usually pretty careful about not taking it into yourself. You haven't done that for years. Jeffy nodded. I didn't mean to take it in. I opened myself to read her condition, and it came at me so strong, I wasn't able to block it. I'm thinking that maybe if I tell what I saw, it will help. I need relief. Okay, let's do it. Your dad and brothers or everyone? Let's not bother the women right now, just Dad and my brothers. Cam nodded, took out his phone, and sent text to Grandmaster Kino, Mark, Joey, and Ricky. Jeffy needs to speak with you for a few minutes. Meet me in 15 near the elevator lobby. 15 minutes later, Jeffy, Cam, Eric, Ricky, Mark, and Joey stood together in a tight circle. I'm sorry, everyone. Not a good way to bring in the new year, I guess, but I need to tell you this, Jeffy said. No worries, sweetie, Eric said calmly. If the Lord presents a new problem to us first thing, then we handle it first thing. And if you felt like it couldn't wait, then he's trying to tell us to take action quickly. Jeffy sighed. Her father always helped to put things into perspective. She nodded and looked up at the strong men in her life. Mark, I know you have an appointment to speak to Brooke soon, right? And then you have to go before a judge, right? Mark nodded. Yes. Angel and I have an appointment to speak to Brooke Friday morning. We have an appointment with a judge the following Tuesday morning. He looked around. In case any of you don't know the story yet, Brooke is not 17, like she said, and her mother did not throw her out of the house because she couldn't get along with her new stepfather. Brooke is actually only 15 as of December 22nd, and she left home because she didn't want her parents to find out that she's pregnant. Her mother reported her missing and is elated that she's been found safe and sound. Her mother wants her back, but Brooke is refusing to go. So we have to go to court to get a judge's decision. Also, the mother and her husband confronted Brooke's boyfriend about her being pregnant, and there was an altercation and police were called. No charges have been filed. Aunt Angel and I were meeting with Brooke to see if we can get her to come clean and tell us why she's so adamant about not going back home, since they now know about the pregnancy and are willing to support her. Jeffy nodded and swayed as her stomach roiled. Cam reached up and steadied her. Jeffy drew a deep breath. Well, you can't send her back home. You can't send her back to their home, Mark. I felt like Jesus asked me to go see her in the restroom. She was throwing up. I opened myself to her so I could read her body, so I could help her, and I saw the whole thing. I know what happened. She took several more breaths. The child she's carrying is not her boyfriend's child. Brooke was raped by her stepfather. She stopped at the heavy sighs that came from all the men. Jeffy went on. About 3 months ago, Brooke's mom and stepfather went to a party, and they came home very drunk, and Brooke's mother went straight to bed, and her stepfather came to her room. He was very intoxicated. He put his hand over her mouth and held her down and took her. Brooke was afraid to tell her mother, and the next week Brooke felt so much fear of him, the stepfather, and so much anger directed mostly toward her mother that she and her mother had a couple of huge fights. She'd been punished and restricted to her room, and she heard her mother tell her stepfather to go up and have a talk to her because her mother wasn't able to get through to her. Brooke was terrified. Before he could get to her room, she climbed out her window and ran away. The first person she'd met, a woman she thought would help her, tried to turn her over to the police, so she went farther away, and she finally ran into Zoe, and they stuck together, and she's suffering terribly, Dad. She's playing what happened to her over and over in her mind, and it makes her sick, and she throws up often. Her emotions, she stopped. I can feel them so strong. I can't stand it a minute longer. Someone has to help her. Someone has to speak to her and let her know that we know what happened to her, and it's going to be okay, and no one is going to make her go back to live in that home, at least not as long as he's living there. Eric nodded. No one is going to make her go back. I guarantee that. She's about 3 months along, right? Jeffy nodded. Mark, we can order a prenatal paternity test, correct? Eric asked. He nodded, with Brooke's permission. Eric nodded. It'll prove the stepfather is the father of the child. What's his name? Stepfather's name is Darren Hopkins. He's a real estate agent in the greater Los Angeles area, Mark supplied. Oh, sorry. We're almost done with this book, and I just have to plug my phone in. Stepfather's name is Darren Hopkins. He's a real estate agent in the greater Los Angeles area, Mark supplied. Joey nodded. I've actually heard of him, or seen his face on signs. Mark nodded. Brooke's mother's name is Naomi Hopkins. Brooke's surname is Tattersall. Her biological father, Vance Tattersall, only has been allowed visitations with her every other weekend. Do you know why so limited? Ricky asked. Mark shook his head. Not yet, but we'll find out. What will happen to her? Once we show why it is that she can't go back, Jeffy asked. Well, Mark began, she's too young to be emancipated, so she'd be given a legal guardian. It could be a member of her family. We'll have to look into why her real father was allowed only visitations instead of joint custody. If that doesn't pan out and there are no other relatives, she'll go into the system. Jeffy sighed and shook her head as the tears began to fall. Is there a possibility that she could go back to live with her mother? Are you asking because you want her to, or because you don't want her to? Joey asked. Jeffy shook her head. I don't want her to unless Brooke wants that. And right now she doesn't want that. She feels betrayed by her mother. And I don't blame her. Her mother failed to protect her. Eric held up his hand. Well, let's not judge. The mother could be neglectful or simply naive, or could even be a victim herself. Let's see how she handles the information. It will all come clear when she's told what happened and see who she tries to protect, her daughter or her new husband. Ricky nodded. How long has her mother and Hopkins been married? Almost 7 months now, Mark said. I'm wondering if there was any hint of intentions or if it was a mistake brought on by the alcohol. Well, either way, Eric said, the damage has been done. Brooke's life, her mental health, and the baby's life are all at risk. Joey sighed. You know, as far as her mental health, Jordan could be brought in on this information and she could talk to Brooke and get her to talk about it. I mean, since she's been in that boat, Brooke might trust her and open up. Unless you think Jordan's not ready for something like that. Eric nodded. That's a good idea, and Jordan is very strong. I'll speak with her and test her out. Ricky nodded. Well, if that's your intention, also speak to young Eric. Eric nodded. Absolutely. Jeffy heaved a sigh of relief, and Cam smiled down at her and put his arm around her. You feel better now? Jeffy nodded. Yes. So much better. She looked up at her father and brothers. I took her pain into myself, and I was struggling, and I thought if I told you all, I'd be able to commute the feeling. She smiled. It worked. I didn't want Eli to pick up on his mommy being in so much turmoil. Well, I'm glad you feel better, Squirt, Mark said. Now who's going to make me feel better? The men smiled. Because they were guys. They were supposed to be strong. They knew they had to show strength, especially in crucial situations. But that didn't mean that things like this didn't hurt them, too. They just bore it for the sake of the family members they protect, because the men breaking down doesn't help anyone. If the men broke down, no one in the family would feel secure. Now it was time to go back to their families and get them home, tucked in safe and sound, as they needed to rest, because today is game day. And that is the end of chapter 38. And I didn't realize it, but there is also an epilogue, which I will record on the next video.